through this area. On one side, the boundary of my land is the middle of West Coal Creek. The creek, of course, continually changes course, runs downstream, roaring in the winter, eroding the bank, taking with it trees, and washing the earth, my property, downstream to become silt in the Nehalem River. So you see, I own part of the Nehalem River too. My neighbors in those early years were Oregon Department of Forestry and Longview Fiber, which has since become Weyerhaeuser. On my walks, I saw the pink timber sale markers and worried. There was no way I could just relax in paradise. What would happen to my forest if the surrounding area was logged? I began talking to foresters who explained the Forest Practices Act, which allows clear cut, leaving 2 trees and 2 logs per acre for the wildlife. And I tried to fantasize what those 2 trees and 2 logs would look like with all the wildlife and the birds and the frogs. I couldn't figure out where to put the frogs, you know, in those 2 trees. Then a forester told me that the herbicide they were spraying was called Stay Put because it didn't move beyond where it was sprayed. Meanwhile, I could see all around me the evidence the earth, the water, the wind, all moved through the forest with no regard at all for property rights. None. In the 2008 storm, I watched even the trees just below the new logging road walk down the hill across the property line as they tipped up and uprooted and missed my house by 150 feet. I could see all around me the expanding clear cuts. I knew that the few remaining native forests were a valuable heritage. I'm a 4th generation Oregonian. My daughter is a 5th generation Oregonian. My grandson there is a 6th generation Oregonian. Probably won't be too long before we have 7. This realization that there was no way to stay separate was what brought me to the Watershed Council, just forming in those early years of my being on the land. It was there I listened to loggers, farmers, foresters, fishermen, city, state, and county leaders, and tried to understand what was going on. I began helping with water testing, planting trees, restoring fish passage. I got to know the Nehalem River watershed without boundaries, and a lot of the people who lived here, who were not from my narrow and rather specific background. In the early days, I think you could say we were pretty naive. We were sure, for instance, that if we just showed the Oregon Department of Forestry what great mushroom growing habitat the forest was behind us, that they wouldn't log it, they wouldn't clear cut it, they'd grow mushrooms. Then we tried convincing them to let us be the gateway to a community forest, where they showcased their highly touted structure-based management approach, thinking, of course, that if the forest behind us was a showcase, they wouldn't be able to clear cut it. Unfortunately, they figured that out too. You can imagine that these ideas didn't go very far. During this time, however, I began to survey what lived with me in the forest, bringing in biologists and botanists, some very special people, Judy Bluehorse Skelton,